This is my audience. And go.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Caitlin, and today I'm going to be speaking about the history of the Pennhurst Asylum, originally named the Eastern Pennsylvania Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. In 1903, the construction of this institution was approved by the Pennsylvania legislature as a solution to care for the growing population of the mentally ill and physically disabled. It was designed to accommodate no less than 500 patients with few additions available. In 1908, the institution was opened. Many patients were court-ordered and sentenced to the institution, while others were sent away by their families with as little as a doctor's recommendation. Due to pressure to accept immigrants, criminals, and orphans who could not be housed elsewhere, conditions were very quickly overcrowded. The physical disabilities of patients ranged from deaf, blind, and mute to abnormalities such as an imperfect walk or a deformed face. Though each of these disabilities needed different treatment, they were all placed in one institution with criminals and the insane. The two mental categories a patient was put into were either imbecile or insane, and physical categories were healthy or epileptic. A few years after opening in 1913, the legislature appointed a commission for the care of the feeble-minded, who was also an active participant in the American eugenics movement. The American eugenics movement began in early 1900s and argued that children and adults with such disabilities were considered defects, and their presence among society was a threat to the gene pool. It was believed that they would grow up to engage in criminal behavior and be the cause of many of society's problems. The commission shared those same beliefs, saying that disabled were unfit for citizenship and posed a menace to the peace. The answer to this problem was immediate segregation and sterilization. They even created cottages set apart for the female patients, in part to prevent pregnancies. The movement itself did not last long, however, the existence of these institutions continued. There seemed to be a complete lack of concern or knowledge of their existence to the outside world. The parents of the patients of Pennhurst would rather forget about their child than to acknowledge what had happened to their children or the possibility of their return. Many of the patients were sent away as small children and grew into adulthood with no memory of ever being outside Pennhurst walls and hardly having any visitors. The intent of much of the staff, as well as the programs implemented, were for the education and training of the children. There is no doubt that the institution, despite all of the horror stories, did many good things for their patients. The patients were placed in industries that helped keep the grounds beautiful and clean. The institution ran itself independently from its food sources to a power plant. Each patient was assigned their own part. At one point, it was even earning its own revenue. There are some former patients and nurses who would argue that they took great care of their patients and made strides in rehabilitation, but the growing number of residents outnumbered the capacity of the staff to properly house and care for them. There were repeated requests to the state for funds and resources, but none were given. Through the years of neglect and understaffing, the inhumane treatment of patients was allowed to continue. Some workers were perhaps desensitized to the human aspect of their jobs. Doctors performed experimental procedures on patients having no scientific justification. In its later years, there were as many as 100 residents living in a room, sometimes chained to their bunks, soiled in their own waste because they were not able to care for themselves. In 1968, NBC 10 aired an expose by Bill Baldini on Pennhurst State Home called Suffer the Little Children. In it, he reveals the overcrowded and understaffed conditions endured at Pennhurst. For example, it is stated that there are over 2,800 patients, but only 2 full-time doctors and only 2 psychiatrists. The special programs for educating and training the patients can accommodate up to 200 people at a time, while the other 2,600 were left waiting their turn, regressing in intelligence and mental conditions. It was expected that many of the patients would never join society. This was the first step in the closure of Pennhurst, informing the public of the injustices being served to their children. The final straw was a lawsuit filed in 1974, Halderman versus Pennhurst. It was initiated by former patients who were released and claimed that their institutionalization violated their constitutional rights. The intent of the lawsuit was for relief, rehabilitation, and relocation of all patients back into their communities. In 1977, the lawsuit finally resulted in a bench trial that lasted 32 days. The findings that the facility was overcrowded and there was an overuse of restraints and psychotropic drugs. 10 years following the court ruling, Pennhurst finally closed its doors. Those that were left abandoned the buildings as well as the contents in them. If visited today, you would find rooms full of beds, filing cabinets with medical records, wheelchairs, and children's toys everywhere. There is a controversy on whether or not it should be used as a Halloween attraction. The significance of its history is to remember the injustices that were done, recognize the mistakes our society has made, and continue to take steps as a nation to ensure fair treatment of our disabled citizens today. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you for coming.